Imagine you are a senior leader. You have the absolute best intelligence available.
Right.
You have the smartest tactical team sitting right there in the room with you. You have millions of dollars of operational resources on the line. And yet, somehow, you make a decision that leads to a total, catastrophic, systemic collapse.
It happens all the time.
It really does. And the question is why? Well, it is because your brain and the brains of every single person sitting at that briefing table secretly lied to you.
Literally lied to you.
Exactly. Because the difference between an amateur and a professional is not just the sheer volume of facts they manage to memorize. It is their ability to perceive the hidden structures and the cognitive traps that are actually governing those facts.
Which is exactly what we are getting into today.
Right. Today, we are opening the Blue Suit files to conduct a deep dive into the architecture of military decision-making. We are examining excerpts from the Airmen Development and Testing Chart alongside Chapter 16 of the AFH-1 Airmen Manual, dated 15 February 2025.
And just to warn you, this document is dense. I mean, it is a massive collision of military doctrine, cognitive psychology, and organizational management theory.
It is a lot to process.
It is. But before we analyze the cognitive processes outlined in the manual, we really must establish the precise parameters of this deep dive.
Okay, so where do we start?
We start with the Airmen Development and Testing Chart, or the ADTC. That is our structural blueprint here. It maps out exactly how deeply personnel are expected to comprehend this material.
And it does that on a scale, right?
Yes, a strict 4-point scale. So level A is just remembering.
Like flashcards.
Exactly like flashcards. Basic fact retrieval and definition recall. Then you move up to level B, which is understanding. This demands the ability to construct meaning, to summarize, infer, and explain the relationships between complex concepts.
So connecting the dots.
Precisely. Then level C is applying, which is executing those procedures in real-world situations. And finally, level D is analyzing. That involves breaking complex concepts down into interrelated parts to see the overall structural vulnerability.
Well, if you're looking at the ADTC for Chapter 16, specifically targeting the expectations for a technical sergeant, the required comprehension level is strictly level B.
Understanding.
Right, understanding. And that dictates our entire mission today. We're not going to simply recite regulations to you like some boring audio textbook.
No one wants to listen to that.
Definitely not. The goal of this deep dive is to help you interpret the analytical why behind the doctrine. We're going to connect the dots between these psychological concepts so you can understand how the machine actually works.
We will systematically break down how the Department of the Air Force expects its leaders to process information.
And how to manage volatile group dynamics.
Exactly. And most importantly, how to avoid the kind of catastrophic systemic failures that end careers and cost lives.
So let us jump right into Section 16A. Because before we can diagnose the flaws in human cognition, we have to establish the baseline reality the organization operates within.
Right. The manual notes a 70-year legacy of Americans relying on airmen as the sentinels of air and cyberspace.
Which is a massive responsibility.
It is. And to maintain that, the Department of the Air Force, or DA, operates on 4 explicit, non-negotiable priorities.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, building the United States Space Force. Second, modernizing the force to meet current and evolving threats. Third, growing strong leaders and resilient families. And fourth, strengthening allies and partners.
So basically, every single action an airman takes must logically align with those strategic priorities.
Exactly. If an action does not serve one of those 4 pillars, it is institutional waste. Plain and simple.
And to ensure that alignment across a massive global force, the manual emphasizes the Chief of Staff, United States Air Force Professional Reading Program.
Right. General Fogelman established this back in 1996.
1996.
Yeah.
Okay. And the stated objective was to create a common frame of reference across all ranks. We are talking officers, enlisted personnel, and civilians.
Everyone.
The program includes books, films, briefings, and journals detailing air power history, leadership success stories, and lessons extracted from recent conflicts.
It also highlights the Guardian and Airmen Innovation Network, or GAIN.
GAIN, right.
Which is an internal program designed to solicit efficiency and cost-saving ideas directly from personnel on the ground.
But look, this brings up an immediate point of friction for me.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you are listening to this, you operate in an era defined by hypersonic missiles, autonomous drone swarms, and aggressive cyber warfare.
True.
So isn't a required reading list of historical accounts inherently outdated? I mean, it feels a bit old school when we are preparing for future conflicts. Why are we reading about biplanes when we have lasers?
I get why you would say that, but that assumption fundamentally misunderstands the structural purpose of the program.
Really?
The objective of reading historical accounts and leadership studies is not to replicate the specific tactics of the past. You are not learning how to build a biplane.
Right.
The objective is to build a shared cognitive language.
The shared cognitive language. Okay, unpack that.
When personnel across a massive, decentralized organizational hierarchy possess a common frame of reference, the speed of decision-making increases exponentially.
Ah, I see.
You do not have to spend critical, time-sensitive moments explaining the underlying philosophy of a strategy if everyone in the room already understands the historical precedent it is based upon.
So it is a mechanism for rapid alignment.
Exactly. It eliminates the friction of communication.
That actually makes perfect sense. It is not about the literal history. It is about knowing the baseline philosophy of air power, so you do not have to translate your intent to your subordinates during a crisis.
You just reference the shared language and execute.
Boom. Okay, so we have established the institutional baseline. We know what the DAF wants us to know. Now we shift to Section 16B, which covers cognitive processes.
This is the good stuff.
This is where we examine the mental minefield. How do intelligent, highly trained leaders accidentally sabotage their own thinking?
It begins with mental frames.
Right, because the human brain is, quite frankly, incredibly lazy.
It really is. It uses frameworks and shortcuts to process a highly complex world as quickly as possible.
And these frames consist of our internal assumptions regarding how variables relate to one another.
Yes. And the most dangerous manifestation of this framing is how we classify a challenge. Specifically, do we frame a challenge as a risk, or do we frame it as an opportunity?
And the clinical consequences of that framing bring us directly to prospect theory.
Prospect theory is fascinating.
It dictates that human beings make decisions entirely differently based on whether a situation is framed as a potential gain or a potential loss.
Right. When faced with a potential loss, decision makers behave completely irrationally.
They escalate their commitment based on sunk costs instead of making objective mathematical evaluations.
Yes. Leaders will routinely commit additional, crucial resources to a failing strategy simply to avoid the perception of defeat.
Because the pain of losing is psychologically twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining.
Exactly. Therefore, leaders will gamble operational success just to avoid admitting a loss has occurred.
If we translate that into everyday behavior, the mechanics of this are identical to the gambler's fallacy.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, imagine you are at a blackjack table. You are experiencing a severe losing streak. You are down $500. Logically, you should walk away.
But you do not.
You do not. You continue placing bets because the psychological probability of winning feels greater with each subsequent loss. You think you are due for a win.
In a practical, real-world sense, it is the equivalent of pouring $3,000 into repairing a structurally compromised vehicle simply because you already purchased a new set of tires for it last month.
Yes. The initial investment, the sunk cost, traps you into future compounding losses.
You are throwing good money after bad to protect the illusion that the first purchase was smart.
Precisely. And the refusal to accept a sunk cost results in compounding systemic failure. The resources are gone, but the leader's ego refuses to process the deficit.
And this cognitive rigidity also dictates exactly how organizations react to change.
How so?
Well, when organizational change is framed as a threat, the biological and operational response is rigid resistance.
People just lock up.
Exactly. The mental framework literally restricts the volume of information leaders are willing to absorb. It artificially limits their solution sets. They bunker down.
But conversely, when change is intentionally framed by leadership as an opportunity, it generates cognitive flexibility.
Yes. To make informed decisions, you must consciously override the biological instinct to view environmental shifts as threats. You have to force your brain out of a defensive posture.
Another cognitive shortcut the manual explicitly identifies is the use of analogies.
Analogies are incredibly powerful communication tools.
They are. They save time and provide immediate clues about potential courses of action by matching a current situation to a past experience.
If situation A looks like situation B, we apply the same fix.
But they are inherently dangerous, right?
Very dangerous. Without deliberate clinical consideration, an analogy causes a decision maker to fixate on the similarities between two events while actively ignoring crucial divergent details.
So fact must be aggressively separated from assumption.
Exactly. If you assume the current conflict is exactly like the last conflict, you are blinding yourself to the new variables that will get your people killed.
The tension between assumption and fact leads directly into the relationship between intuition and formal analysis.
Intuition gets a bad rap sometimes. It is frequently and incorrectly misunderstood as a purely emotional response or a gut feeling.
Like it is some sort of magic.
Right, but it is not magic. Intuition is rapid pattern recognition based on previous stored experience. It operates like a cognitive script.
So a senior leader observes a scenario, recognizes a pattern, mentally simulates a solution based on past data, and executes it.
And this happens in milliseconds. However, intuition without formal analysis is a massive vulnerability.
They need to work together.
Yes. Formal analysis must be utilized to check the objective validity of intuition. And in turn, intuition must be used to test the underlying assumptions of the formal analysis.
So if the math says one thing, but a 30-year veteran's pattern recognition screams that something is wrong, both variables must be interrogated.
They are interdependent control mechanisms. You need both.
Okay, so we have mapped the cognitive traps of the individual mind. We know how your own brain will use sunk costs and bad analogies to lie to you.
Which is terrifying enough on its own.
Truly. But now we must examine what occurs when you take multiple individuals, each carrying their own unique cognitive biases and flawed mental frames, and place them into a single room to formulate a unified decision.
Right. Section 16b details critical thinking in groups.
And the conventional wisdom asserts that groups automatically make superior decisions due to aggregated talent. Two heads are better than one.
But the manual explicitly warns against this assumption.
Really. Just putting smart people in a room does not guarantee a smart outcome.
Not at all. A functional group must possess highly specific structural characteristics. Otherwise, it devolves into a liability.
What kind of characteristics?
It must be decentralized. It must aggregate independent judgments, meaning the members should ideally not be subordinate to one another.
You have to neutralize hierarchical stigma.
Exactly. If a group lacks these parameters, hindrances immediately emerge. Individuals will filter information for personal reasons.
Or they will selectively present data up the chain of command to manipulate the outcome.
Yes. They will tell the commander what the commander wants to hear rather than what the operational reality dictates.
Right, because if I have a captain sitting in a brainstorming session and my direct reporting manager, a major, is sitting right across the table,
You are going to be careful about what you say.
I am absolutely going to filter my ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to subconsciously tailor my input to match what I think the major's preferences are.
The hierarchy corrupts the data.
And the ultimate systemic failure of this kind of group dynamic is groupthink.
Groupthink is the pathological desire for unanimity at the expense of critical analysis.
And the symptoms are highly predictable and incredibly dangerous.
The group develops a collective illusion of invulnerability.
They start actively rationalizing away any disconfirming data.
They conclude discussions with a false sense of unanimous agreement.
And they apply direct, often punitive pressure to any individual presenting a dissenting view.
Which brings us to the only functional antidote to groupthink.
The dissenting airmen.
Yes. The statistical evidence for this is absolute. Consider the mechanics of a jury verdict.
Okay.
In a binary yes or no decision paradigm, the majority position established on the very first ballot becomes the final decision 85% of the time.
Wow, 85%.
The initial momentum simply crushes opposition. The psychological pressure to conform overwhelms objective analysis.
However, in complex organizational decisions, the presence of even a single dissenting voice radically alters the cognitive trajectory of the entire group.
Let us ground this in the job candidate scenario outlined in the text.
Right. Imagine your group is evaluating two civilian applicants, candidate A and candidate B.
The frame is presented as a strict binary choice.
And the vast majority of the room supports candidate A, but you support candidate B.
Even if the group ultimately rejects your preference and hires candidate A, your vocal dissent forces them to engage in divergent thinking.
Because the friction of your disagreement compels the group to search for alternative solutions just to justify their own position.
Because you pushed back, they suddenly have to ask new questions.
Like, could the position be re-advertised?
Could one candidate be detailed temporarily to assess performance?
Could the role be filled by a military member instead of a civilian?
Your refusal to conform shatters the binary frame.
The presence of the dissenter introduces necessary variables. It forces the group to rigorously defend their assumptions.
Furthermore, the manual cites Dr. Andrew J. Dubrin on the absolute necessity of tactful criticism within high-performance teams.
Tactful criticism. Because brutal honesty is often weaponized for personal gain.
Exactly. It creates defensive posturing, which shuts down cognitive flexibility immediately.
Constructive criticism must focus exclusively on improving the mission process. The collective purpose must remain central to the feedback loop.
You are critiquing the architecture of the idea, not the character of the individual presenting it.
But if you are listening to this, you might be thinking, wait a minute. Unity of command is a core military virtue. We need everyone moving in the same direction.
Right.
So isn't intentionally injecting internal conflict dangerous to the mission? How do we balance the need for dissent with the need for immediate, unified execution?
You resolve that by distinguishing between the two distinct categories of conflict.
Okay, break those down.
First, you have cognitive conflict. This is the rigorous debate of ideas, theories, and data. It is highly necessary and deeply constructive. It pressure tests the operational plan.
And the second type.
Affective conflict. This is entirely emotional. It targets the individual rather than the concept. It is driven by ego, resentment, and personality clashes.
And that is highly destructive.
Very. A leader's primary structural function in a decision-making environment is to aggressively stimulate cognitive conflict while ruthlessly suppressing affective conflict.
You debate the data. You do not attack the personnel.
Exactly.
When leaders fail to manage those two types of conflict, organizations inevitably develop cultures of indecision.
And the manual identifies 3 distinct organizational cultures that paralyze operations.
Let's go through them. First is the culture of no.
In this environment, lone dissenters possess the unchecked power to block proposals.
Meetings devolve into the clinical, cynical dissection of ideas without any requirement to provide alternative solutions.
Subordinates are socially rewarded for tearing down plans rather than strengthening them. It is an environment of intellectual snipers.
That sounds miserable.
It is. Second is the culture of yes. This is characterized by silent dissent, and it is arguably the most insidious of the 3.
Silent dissent, so people just agree to the commander's face.
Yes. Individuals remain perfectly quiet during the planning phase, creating a tacit, false endorsement of the strategy.
But then, once the meeting concludes, they express their severe disagreement externally.
They subtly undermine the implementation of the plan at the tactical level. Silence in these cultures does not equal assent, it equals subversion.
The leader assumes they have consensus, but the foundation is completely hollow.
We have all survived a briefing exactly like that.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone nods along while the commander outlines a fundamentally flawed PowerPoint presentation. Nobody says a word.
Then the second the meeting is dismissed, everyone gathers in the parking lot to complain about how the plan is impossible and doomed to fail.
That parking lot conversation is the culture of yes in action.
Precisely. And the third is the culture of maybe.
Analysis paralysis.
Exactly. This is the domain of pure analysis paralysis. Decision makers continuously gather data to avoid making a definitive choice.
This culture flourishes in highly ambiguous situations or in units where leaders practice extreme conflict avoidance.
They chase diminishing returns of information, perpetually asking for one more report.
Failing to realize that delaying a decision is, in itself, a definitive decision with severe operational consequences.
That consequence perfectly transitions our deep dive into the outcomes of Sections 16b and 16c.
We have diagnosed how individual brains lie to us and how group dynamics fail.
Now we must examine the anatomy of catastrophe.
What actually happens when these localized cognitive failures scale up into complex global operational systems?
It begins with the concept of procedural justice, fairness, and legitimacy. The execution of a decision depends entirely on the consensus of the team implementing it.
And the manual provides a stark, almost humorous warning here.
Let's hear it.
It states, a camel is a horse built by consensus.
That is a great visual.
But it is critical to understand that consensus does not mean unanimity. It does not mean every single person agrees that the final choice is their absolute favorite choice.
Consensus means a shared commitment to the outcome.
Great leaders do not see consensus as a starting point. They build consensus through procedural fairness.
Right. If the team does not perceive the decision-making process as legitimate, if they think the game was rigged from the start, they will not support the outcome, even if they actually agree with the final choice.
The process must be beyond reproach.
And when procedural legitimacy fails and when systems become overly complex, we enter the realm of normal accident theory.
Okay, this is the structural perspective on catastrophic failure.
Yes. In highly complex, tightly coupled systems, small, localized mistakes trigger nonlinear system-wide failures.
So an automobile assembly line is a linear process. If a machine breaks, the line stops. But the variable is completely isolated.
But Department of the Air Force power projection is not an assembly line.
It is an interactively complex web.
Exactly. A minor failure in one subsystem creates cascading, immediate, and unpredictable effects across multiple dependent subsystems before leadership can even diagnose the initial symptom.
In these tightly coupled environments, failure is structural. It is mathematically unavoidable over a long enough timeline.
The behavioral counterpart to that structural failure is normalized deviance theory.
Normalized deviance. This is the gradual systemic acceptance of unexpected risks and degraded standards until the degradation literally becomes the new normal.
And the manual cites the ultimate tragic example of this psychological trap.
The Challenger Space Shuttle disaster.
NASA engineers observed the physical erosion of the O-rings on previous flights.
But because the erosion had not yet caused a catastrophic explosion, the organization slowly accepted the risk.
They convinced themselves that the degraded state was an acceptable baseline.
NASA was driven by an intense organizational desire to make spaceflight feel routine, to maintain funding and public interest.
The external pressure normalized a deadly deviance from baseline engineering standards.
The system operated far outside of its engineered safety margins, and because nothing immediately exploded on the previous flights, the operators falsely assumed the new degraded margin was safe.
The absence of immediate consequence reinforced the flawed cognitive frame.
They proved their own false hypothesis, right up until the system suffered total failure.
If we bring that down to a localized level, this exact phenomenon manifests as practical drift.
Practical drift. Okay, explain that.
Subunit leaders implement small, seemingly efficient shortcuts that comply with the broad intent of the organization, but drift away from the exact written standard.
It is the equivalent of individuals walking across the grass on a college campus to save 30 seconds instead of using the paved sidewalk.
Right. One person does it, and the impact is completely negligible.
100 people do it over 6 months, and a permanent dirt path is carved into the landscape.
On a college quad, that is just an aesthetic issue.
But on an Air Force flight line, practical drift regarding maintenance procedures or pre-flight checklists is a fatal vulnerability.
You skip a step because it saves 5 minutes. Nothing bad happens, so you keep skipping it.
You have just normalized deviance.
And the mechanisms to counteract practical drift are highly specific. Leaders must flatten hierarchies to reduce the information filtering we discussed earlier.
They must identify and fix structural root causes rather than applying localized bandages.
Most importantly, they must vigorously monitor the seams.
The seams.
Yes, the seams are the specific operational points where information and responsibility are handed off between different units or subsystems.
That handoff is where data is lost, assumptions are made, and drift occurs.
Furthermore, organizations must react to ambiguity. Ambiguous threats often fail to trigger formal organizational responses.
Because the threat is not clearly defined, leaders just ignore it.
Right, quietly narrowing the window of opportunity to intervene before catastrophic failure materializes.
Wow. Okay, so we have dissected the mechanics of systemic failure. We know the diseases.
Now we open Section 16C to examine the analytical toolkit the DF provides to actually cure these vulnerabilities.
Informed decision-making in the modern era begins with digital and information literacy. The internet is an entirely unregulated data environment designed to manipulate attention.
So the manual mandates the use of the CRA-8 test to evaluate source material.
The CRAAP methodology. It is a necessary cognitive filtration system.
Let's walk through what it stands for. C is for currency, R is relevance, the first A is authority, the second A is accuracy, and P is purpose.
Okay, let's break this down. Currency.
Currency means asking when the data was published, and does the operational environment require real-time updates? Data from 2022 might be completely useless in a 2025 cyber environment.
Next is relevance. Does this data actually answer this specific tactical question, or is it merely adjacent information masquerading as a solution?
Authority. What are the verifiable credentials of the publisher?
Accuracy. Is the data supported by empirical evidence, cross-reference sources, and peer review?
And finally, purpose. Does the information exist to inform, or does it exist to sell, persuade, or manipulate?
You must identify the underlying biases of the data source before you integrate it into a decision matrix, especially in an era of weaponized disinformation.
Now, if you are deployed in a fast-paced environment, running a full 5-point check on every single piece of data sounds exhausting.
It really does. But if you think about it as a defense mechanism against information warfare, it becomes non-negotiable.
Exactly, and once the data is filtered through that test, analytical thinking must be applied.
The text highlights two critical vulnerabilities in how humans analyze data. The first is the limitation of small sample sizes.
The manual provides a great scenario for this. Choosing between University A and University B.
Right. Let us say your friends spent 4 years at University B and absolutely hated it. They provide years of negative data.
But you visit University B for a single afternoon, have a pleasant interaction with a professor, and your intuition tells you to enroll.
Relying on that gut feeling is a fundamental mathematical error.
Yes, your brief one-day visit is a statistically insignificant sample size.
The long-term data provided by multiple individuals over several years carries a drastically higher probability of accuracy.
But human beings default to small sample sizes because vivid personal experiences trigger deep emotional resonance.
And that emotional resonance completely bypasses logical analysis.
You trust your own afternoon over a decade of combined empirical data because your brain prioritizes a personal narrative over statistics.
The second analytical vulnerability is the failure to recognize that correlation does not imply causality.
This is where leaders constantly trick themselves.
The manual presents the XYZ supplement scenario. Imagine a military base starts offering free XYZ health supplements at the dining facility.
The personnel who take the supplements subsequently show vastly improved physical fitness scores.
And the personnel who do not take the supplements show zero improvement.
The immediate flawed conclusion by base leadership is that the supplement caused the fitness improvement.
They correlate the pill with the passing score.
But that conclusion completely ignores the absence of a control group and the presence of severe self-selection bias.
Self-selection bias,
Right.
right? Because the individuals who voluntarily choose to take a health supplement are highly likely to be the exact same individuals who possess the internal motivation to train harder, sleep longer, and eat cleaner.
The supplement did not cause the improved score. The underlying psychological profile of the user caused the improved score.
Unless the two groups are identical in every single variable except the introduction of the supplement, the comparison is mathematically invalid.
Leaders who fail to understand this will allocate budget to a useless supplement rather than investing in actual training.
Which brings us to the architecture of problem solving. Section 16C outlines the structural models for actually arriving at a solution once you have accurate filtered data.
The foundation of this is understanding the profound difference between divergent thinking and convergent thinking.
Divergent thinking is the creative generation of multiple, wildly varied solutions. It is expanding the possibilities.
While convergent thinking is the clinical analytical process of evaluating those options and selecting the single best solution from the list.
And formal education optimizes the human brain almost entirely for convergent thinking.
Right. Schools train individuals to find the single correct answer on a standardized test. Consequently, it severely atrophies our capacity for divergent thinking.
Attempting to brainstorm creative ideas while simultaneously judging their viability is cognitively impossible. It just halts the process.
It is the mechanical equivalent of driving a car by pressing the accelerator and the brake at the exact same time.
You burn out the engine and go nowhere.
To separate these two conflicting processes, the DEF utilizes the Osborne-Parnes model.
The core unbreakable principle of this model is deferred judgment. You cannot evaluate while you generate.
It operates in 6 distinct sequential stages. Let us walk through how an airman would actually use this.
Okay, stage 1 is mess finding.
You must isolate the core issue and frame it as a how-to statement.
For example, your unit is suffering from logistics delays. Your statement is how to reduce equipment failure rates on the flight line.
Stage 2 is data finding. You execute a rigorous inquiry using the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why.
You identify the data you possess, and critically, you identify the blind spots, the data you lack.
Stage 3 is problem finding. You shift the framework using the specific phrase, in what ways might we, or IWWMW.
You generate multiple problem statements until you uncover the foundational structural issue, not just the surface symptom.
You might realize the problem isn't the equipment at all, it is the maintenance schedule.
Stage 4 is idea finding. This is pure divergent thinking.
The objective is sheer volume. You mandate a goal of 50 to 75 ideas.
And you enforce strict anonymity during submission to protect individuals from the hierarchical stigma we discussed earlier.
Right. A junior enlisted airman must be able to pitch an idea without fear of a senior non-commissioned officer rejecting it on site.
And if time permits, you implement an incubation period, allowing the team to sleep, letting the subconscious process the data without active stress.
Which brings us to stage 5, solution finding.
This is the hard pivot to convergent thinking. You establish objective evaluation criteria like financial cost, time constraints, safety margins, and morale impact.
You assign a weighted value from 1 to 10 for each criterion based on immediate mission priority.
If you are in combat, time might be a 10 and cost might be a 2.
You then plug the generated ideas into a decision matrix, rate them against the criteria, and multiply by the weight.
The mathematics dictate the optimal choice, removing human bias completely.
And finally, stage 6 is acceptance finding.
Generating the tactical step-by-step plan to actually implement the mathematical victor in the real world.
The Osborne-Parnes model provides the mechanical steps to find the answer.
But the Vroom-Yetton-Jago decision-making model provides the how.
It is a framework for deciding exactly how you are going to decide.
It is categorized into 5 distinct levels of leader involvement, and each carries specific psychological risks.
Level 1 is decide and announce. The leader makes a unilateral decision using available information.
It is incredibly rapid, suitable for crisis response, but it risks completely alienating the team due to a lack of consultation.
Level 2 is gather input individually, then decide.
The leader consults specific subject matter experts privately.
This increases data quality, but routinely generates severe resentment among other team members who perceive the targeted consultation as favoritism or exclusion.
Level 3 is gather group input, then decide. The leader convenes the entire team, extracts their data in a collaborative setting, and then retains the authority to make the final call.
This builds synergy and pools intelligence, but it carries a massive, severe risk.
What is the risk?
If the leader dismisses the group's input and does what they originally planned anyway, the team will perceive the entire exercise as a manipulative facade.
You will severely damage future trust.
Level 4 is facilitate consensus. The leader presents the problem and acts merely as a guide, pushing the group to a shared agreement.
This maximizes ownership and trust, but the friction here is immense.
It is incredibly time-consuming and often risks producing a compromised, watered-down, suboptimal solution just to keep everyone in the room happy.
Finally, level 5 is delegate with constraints.
The leader assigns the problem to the group, defines the strict operational boundaries, such as budget and timeline, and then steps back entirely to provide resources.
This is the ultimate tool for building team capabilities and freeing up the leader's cognitive bandwidth for larger strategic issues.
However, the consequence of misapplying this is steep.
Right, if the team lacks the analytical skills or the maturity to process the data, level 5 delegation will result in systemic disharmony, infighting, and a completely failed outcome.
The leader must accurately diagnose the team's capability before selecting the decision level.
So we have built the framework for analyzing data and structuring decisions in the present. We know how to use the models to bypass our own flawed psychology.
Now we look to section 16D, what we don't know.
How does the DAF apply these rigid cognitive models to the unpredictable, rapidly accelerating landscape of future warfare?
It begins with acknowledging the brutal reality of the technology gap.
Adversaries are no longer decades behind. They are classified as fast followers of American innovation.
They are actively and aggressively narrowing the capability gap.
The manual explicitly notes that while fifth-generation aircraft are vital for penetrating existing defenses, adversaries are heavily investing in advanced ground-based systems designed specifically to neutralize American air superiority.
And the operational environment is further destabilized by a lack of budget predictability, which degrades the DAF's ability to consistently modernize training facilities and equipment.
To maintain the asymmetric advantage, the force cannot rely solely on superior hardware. Hardware is easily replicated.
It must rely on the cognitive agility and analytical superiority of its personnel.
And this necessitates a cultural shift from delegation to empowerment.
The military is fundamentally an authoritarian structure designed for rapid crisis response. That is its nature.
But the manual clarifies the historical reality. Truly great military leaders never dictated the how.
They dictated the what and established the left and right limits for execution.
Delegation simply assigns a task to a subordinate. Empowerment transfers actual ownership.
It transforms subordinates into stakeholders who are emotionally, intellectually, and professionally invested in the organizational vision.
If they own the problem, they will solve it faster than if they are just following a checklist.
This culture of empowerment is mandatory for the future of warfare, which centers entirely on human-to-machine teaming.
The doctrine dictates a fundamental paradigm shift in human factors engineering.
Historically, airmen were placed in the loop of automated systems, meaning they had to manually approve or execute microprocesses.
But the objective now is to place airmen on the loop.
The organization must automate repetitive, data-heavy machine processes, removing the human from the minutia.
So the human brain is entirely free to execute advanced cognitive and analytical tasks that machines cannot perform, such as ethical judgment and contextual strategy.
To achieve this monumental shift, the DAF focuses heavily on collaboration.
Fostering innovation requires tapping into the decentralized intelligence of the entire force.
The GAME program, alongside deep partnerships with traditional defense industry contractors, non-traditional tech sectors, and academia, is designed to push the boundaries of autonomous systems, directed energy weapons, and hypersonics.
Rapid change is the baseline operating environment. It is the new normal.
If your cognitive frame views that change as a threat, and you cannot adapt, the change becomes a fatal vulnerability.
But if you are mentally agile, it becomes your primary weapon.
The synthesis of these concepts is the absolute core of Level B comprehension for a developing leader.
We began by establishing the baseline of institutional knowledge.
We mapped the psychological traps of mental framing, prospect theory, and sunk costs.
We analyzed the catastrophic potential of groupthink and the mathematical necessity of the dissenting voice to shatter the binary frame.
We conducted a clinical postmortem on complex systems via normal accident theory and normalized deviance.
Finally, we deployed the CRA test, the Osborne-Parnes decision matrix, and the Vroom-Yetton-Jago model to mathematically structure our analytical response.
We have dissected the mechanics of how a professional military organization thinks, how it fails, and how it actively corrects itself.
But before we close the files on this deep dive, we must connect the doctrine of the future to the psychological baseline we established at the very beginning.
The manual stated that human intuition is essentially a pattern recognition script based on past experience.
It also stated that the DF is rapidly moving airmen on the loop, while artificial intelligence and machine learning handle the micro-decisions in the loop.
This presents the ultimate cognitive test for the future force.
Exactly. As we rely increasingly on algorithmic data to formulate our tactical and strategic decisions, how do we guarantee those algorithms do not fall victim to their own mathematical version of normalized deviance?
Think about it. If an autonomous system encounters a slight anomaly, calculates the risk, and quietly normalizes a procedural shortcut to increase its own efficiency, will the human airman sitting on the loop possess the rigorous analytical skepticism required to detect that drift?
Or will we simply accept the machine's output as infallible fact right up until the complex system suffers a catastrophic, nonlinear failure?
That is the variable you must solve for.
That is what separates the amateur from the professional. Take the frameworks we broke down today, the decision matrices, the conflict parameters, the structural analyses, and deploy them in your next operational planning session or your next study group.
Do not blindly accept the consensus.
Question the analogy. Find the deviance before it normalizes into a disaster. Keep digging.